Okay, thank
Um,
you. Hello.
hello,
Okay.
hello.
I was going to say thank you for joining me on the Mighty Dragon, but you jumped
Oh
in
well.
super fast there, super keen. Arne Venema, Hong Kong.
Yes, yes. Hong Kong, Hong Kong. Here we are, 852 in the UK, I believe.
Yes, absolutely. In the
Hmm,
Cotswolds, in the
there you go.
countryside. So,
Yes.
how is Hong Kong?
Hong Kong's all right. It's I mean, a lot has happened this year, obviously, but in terms of the virus, I think things are reasonably under control. I keep in touch with my family and stuff like that in Europe, and
Mm,
Hong Kong's doing reasonably well. We went through SARS and all that, so it's kind of be prepared,
yeah.
but still, considering the way the world is going, I guess can't complain too much. So
Right.
yeah.
Okay. I saw that there were 3 clear days of the virus there. That's pretty
Yes,
good,
yes,
isn't it?
yes. That's very good. Yeah, but otherwise, this year, I mean, normally we would have been shooting. I was supposed to direct a film this year and some TV
Yeah.
shows and everything else, but it got sidetracked to 2021. But I mean, spent the time making music instead, so doing that and all that. So yeah,
I was
it's
going
been
to ask you how this year's panned out for you. So it's been music, has it, this year, and everything's on hold till next year?
Yeah, more or less. Like, I've written 2 albums that are getting mastered right now, and I've finished almost a third on Acid Chicken Records and Cut Records. They're putting them out. And then in terms of like, also written a lot of treatments, finishing off 2 screenplays, one of which with Joe Ferrello. I'm not sure if he's been on the show before, but I'm sure you know of him.
I've
Uh,
interviewed Joe. He was one of my first interviews, a written one
yes, yes.
on the blog.
Yeah. Joe Fredlo is a dear friend of mine, and we
Yeah,
write together a lot. And yeah, we actually wrote. We were going to do a film this year called Noriko originally. There's been
yeah,
some. It was being produced by Pedro Lopez and Mike Leader, and yeah, due to circumstances, it didn't pan out. But you know what? There's always next year. So in terms of that, that's
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how are you working with Joe? He's in New York now, right? And you're in Hong Kong.
Well,
Does it still work well?
this is this. So this is interesting. I find that when we worked before together in Hong Kong, we literally would write stuff and send it back and forth. And sometimes we were in the same room, sometimes we weren't. And then it's like we'd act out scenes and everything and figure out ways to write them down. And in this case, him being in New York in some ways works out because while I'm asleep, he's at work. So you've got this like this machine because there's a 12-hour time difference between Hong Kong and New York. So you got this machine
Right.
that just keeps going, and
Yeah.
and that's good fun and it's really cool in terms of that because it even though your friends are such a distance because of the wonders of the internet, like you can
Yeah.
kind of still keep in touch with them. I mean, I grew up in like about 8 different countries and like it used to be back in the 80s when you moved away or even the 90s, like you just totally lost touch with people. And
Yeah.
because of what the internet is nowadays, you can work from abroad. I mean, look, we're doing this podcast from one
I know.
nation to the other, so it's pretty cool.
It's incredible, isn't it? So you
So
can
yeah,
just
that's pretty awesome. Yeah, it's good, it's quite incredible. Yeah.
great. So
So that's good, but yeah.
I'm so glad you've joined me today. Because I've heard you're a horror film aficionado, I guess.
Yes,
Would you say you are?
yes, I am. I love horror films. The fun part about it is when I was growing up, my mom, I mean, I know you have 2 kids. I don't, but my mom wouldn't be like, no horror films, when you grow
Yeah.
up and stuff like that. And I've kind of really got to meet a lot of people in the horror film community. My first feature would have been a horror film, or will be a horror film.
Okay.
And I'm still talking to other people that are doing other things. So yeah, I love horror movies. I love them. And yeah, I mean, if you want, if we can, I can chat about horror movies for quite a while. So that's good.
Brilliant. I mean, I started watching horror films when I was quite young too. And back in the
Ah,
80s, you could just go down to the newsagent and get a VHS out and
yeah.
VHS tape out. And we got The Exorcist out. And I was about 12. He didn't care, the newsagent, at all, like what you picked out. And
Well, that's really interesting because I guess that means you went through the video nasties era as well. So
yeah,
that is a fascinating bit of film history actually, because when you look back at it, I mean, for people who don't know, like at one point, think you could get hold of stuff really easily, and all of a sudden they went, these things are too nasty to show. And I think the censorship board in the UK, on my opinion, went a little bit overboard with some things.
yeah,
So I mean, it would it's quite interesting. I mean, I lived in this era of videotapes as well. I missed going to the video store, you know. I mean,
Yes.
there's something about going into the store and seeing all the cover art to all these mad films. And you know, and you I mean, I'm sure you've also rented films based on the cover art on the VHS tape. And sometimes, like, you know, or most of the time, you got a piece of shit, let's be honest here. I
Yeah.
mean, you looked at it, you went, well, this thing is like, who do people make money off this? Oh, they got me again. But every now and again you stumbled across a gem, you know. And if that was The Exorcist for you, or if it's like, you know, some other film from the 80s like Lost Boys, which is one of my favorite as well.
Oh
I
my
mean,
God, yeah.
I remember seeing that for the first time and that just blowing me away. So yeah, no, it was it's good stuff.
That's still a
Yeah.
film that's brilliant now, isn't it? You can watch it now and just be like, oh God,
Well,
that's
I
great.
think a lot of people like Lost Boys, and I think younger generations have heard people like who grew up in the 90s and even early
Mm.
2000s talk about it. And I think a film like that, even though I mean it does take place in the 80s, but kind of it helps elevate the magic of it, because in the end of the day it always works because it's a coming of age story, right?
Mm.
This kid
Yeah.
moves to a new town, he meets new friends, he has to make choices, and I think good horror, a lot of good horror kind of circulates around the subject of innocence.
Yeah.
So, and The Lost Boys is like that, and everything. I mean, we'll talk more about this later on, but slasher films always have that.
Yeah.
You know, if you jump under the covers with someone, you're gonna die. So, like,
Yeah.
it's actually an interesting subject. That so yeah, to go around. So
Cool.
yeah,
So
that's what it is.
I pulled out a few from the decades. I've been running some interviews this week,
Yes,
talking to people about their favourite horror films from the decades. And I've pulled out a few. I
yeah.
started from the 60s. I thought that was a good place to start.
Mm.
Maybe I've missed out something here. I should have gone back to 50s. Potentially, I could have done.
Well, okay. If I can interrupt right there, I think the 60s is a great place to start, but there's one movie. There's one movie from 1959 I would love to bring up. If you haven't seen it,
Okay.
it's called The Tingler. Have you ever heard about this film?
No. No.
Okay, like, so immediately the fact that I love the fact that that's your reaction, because immediately if I tell you about the man who was behind this movie, this is a man, basically it was directed by a man who was directed and produced by a gentleman named William Castle. And William Castle is, I guess, is an amalgamation of maybe Alfred Hitchcock and a used car salesman. You slam those two together and you get the most amazing result from that. Like, he if you ever, it's a pity we can't pull up video, but if you see the way William Castle promotes his films, he'd be like, you're in for the most terrifying, shocking moment of your life. And he would employ something I wish they still did nowadays, and maybe that's just me, but he would have gimmicks in his films. For example, he directed a film called The House of Haunted Hill, and he'd have cinemas fly a skeleton through the cinema. There'd be a rubber skeleton flying above the audience while they're watching this movie. And for The Tingler, he did something I think he gets sued for nowadays, potentially. What he did was, The Tingler is about this creature in a box, and if you get close to it or whatever else, you scream. It was scary, and the only way it latched on you, and the only way you can get rid of it is by screaming as loud as you can. So then the Tingler would be defeated. It would latch on you, and if you didn't scream, it killed you. So what William Castle did was, he hooked up all these cinema seats with little buzzers under them. So whenever the Tingler came on screen, people's cinema seats would get buzzed with a little quick electric shock. And people in the audience would scream when the Tingler came on. So
oh my God, that is really kind of early days of 4D cinema in a way.
It's showmanship. It's almost like a circus in that way. And Vincent Price is in the film. And Vincent Price, I mean, there's some actors you want to work with, because even though Vincent Price made the Hammer films, which we'll obviously talk about in a bit, but Vincent Price could have the most hokey, crazy films and characters to deal with, and he's the main character in this, yet he always comes off like a gentleman. And in this film, he has a scene where the Tingler's grabbing a hold of him, and he's going, ah, and he's running around this laboratory, he's screaming and everything, and anybody else that would do that would look ridiculous, but Vincent Price pulls it off with such class. So I highly recommend The Tingler from 1959. It's in theory it's a horror film, but it's an experience you have to see. So The Tingler, 1959, William Castle. I wish I could have met the man.
I think I was reading something about The Conjuring, and in the Philippines,
Yes.
there would be a priest that would bless the audience before they went in to watch it because it was so.
Yeah.
I
It's
mean, that can you imagine turning up to a cinema and a priest there? I mean,
I
God,
would love it. I would
how
love it.
cool is that?
That
Seriously, like,
see, but that's showmanship, and I think there's something. I mean, I was reading today an article about they're like, oh, cinemas are going to die out because of COVID-19 and everything else, and if that did happen, I'd be dreadfully sad because I think there's almost like there's a real experience going to the movies, and if someone can like do something to even elevate that experience some more, and bring in the priest or have electric
yeah,
shocks under your chair. I mean, make sure the voltage is right there. Like, I think that's it. I mean, film started out with people hanging white sheets in Australia originally, by the way, hanging white sheets over, like, a bit of cable or fencing or wiring or whatever, and they project onto that, and that's a show. In the end of the day, this is supposed to be a show, and I love Netflix and all that stuff, having it at home. But I will be, I will, to the end of my days, I'll say I want to go to somewhere to experience the movies. I
yeah,
want to sit in a seat. I want to have, like, my popcorn or whatever else, and I want
yeah,
to watch it on a fuck you big screen. That's what I want.
yeah, yeah.
So,
I think
and there's something about that.
if cinemas die out, then there'll be generations not experiencing the huge intro of Star Wars. And, it was just so wonderful, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, and all
To
these
sit
other
there and
films. Yeah.
experience that and so many
and
other
and there's
films.
something and there's something about horror movies, like, about seeing horror movies in particular in the cinema, because you're in the dark, you've got these people around you, when they go boo, everybody jumps and goes like that at the same time. You don't have that at home. I'm sorry, and I'm
Yeah,
not bashing Netflix. I think what Netflix is doing is absolutely stunningly amazing, but I think there's something about the audience experience of all seeing a film
yeah,
together which is absolutely amazing. So yeah,
yeah,
and we need that. So it's the show.
yeah,
We're an entertainment
absolutely.
culture. So yeah.
Okay, if we start in the 60s, I've got Night of the Living Dead, I've got Rosemary's Baby,
Yes.
and I've got Psycho.
All right. Well, Psycho, very good. Alfred Hitchcock essentially doing a psychological slasher film based on Ed Gein, of course, who is
Yeah,
a very scary human being, like,
yeah,
skin for lampshades and stuff like that. I mean,
yeah,
the quintessential boogeyman
yeah.
of the 60s. So yeah.
Would you pick Psycho out that list, or was it Night of the Living
Not
Dead for you?
well. Night of Living Dead I like quite a bit, because Night of Living Dead obviously was very much inspired by the EC comic books, and EC comics was great because they had these really scary scenes and everything else in these books, really nicely hand drawn, and a lot of the angles and shots in Night of Living Dead are based on the EC comic shots as well. So George Romero, who was a massive fan, has acknowledged this before. We're watching these films, and it's the first like film to really, I mean, White Zombie and stuff like that came out before that, but it really showed the quintessential undead that we know now, and that's a huge deal. I mean, Resident Evils and everything else.
Yes,
And I think that um, when it comes down to it, like, yeah, it's such a huge film. No one ever made money off it, on the production, by the way. So
really.
yeah, yeah, it was a total mess in terms of financing and contracts and everything else. So George Romero never made money off it. It's in public domain now, so it's on YouTube and everything else. You can watch it for free.
I will
But
watch it for sure. I will
yeah,
watch it after this.
quick note about Night of the Living Dead and George Romero. Actually, I don't know if you know this, but there's the Resident Evil games came on later on, which are these huge games on the PlayStation 1, and they went through it. It was just zombies and very much inspired by his
Yeah,
work. He originally was contacted to write the script for the original Resident Evil film, which came out, in years and years later, and they turned it down because they said he didn't quite understand the genre and stuff like that, which
that's
is ironic because he
ridiculous.
invented it. Yeah, yeah.
But I don't know
So
about you. I really like the Resident Evil video games,
I love
and
him. Yeah.
I was disappointed by the films. Were you
Well,
disappointed by the films?
highly disappointed by the
Yeah,
films. I think that I think what Paul Anderson was trying to do was, I think he's trying to tell a different story in the Resident Evil universe. But what I mean, I have no crystal ball. I can't say what's in his head. So I'm guessing he was trying to do that, but I don't think it's stuck close enough to the source material. So I
okay.
think I think that film should be called something else than Resident Evil. So,
I
but
agree.
legendarily, I think he got the gig because he did Mortal Kombat, right? I mean, that's one of the
Yeah,
biggest video game films ever. I mean, but traditionally, video game films don't do that well. And I think that's the same thing with Resident Evil. But on the other hand, they made a boatload of money, and the movie business is about making money.
Yeah.
So,
I felt
in terms of that,
28 Days Later was a bit more true to the Resident
Res-
Evil video game,
sure,
I would say.
sure. Yeah,
I
yeah,
would
yeah,
say.
yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
I felt
So,
that. Okay. So 1970s, the golden era of horror films.
ooh.
The
Oh
best
well,
to
the
me,
'80s and the '70s. For me, the '80s is better, but the '70s
really.
is very good. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so
I think
those, but
because I'm
that's a
old.
no, 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 no. I mean, I can go on about '80s horror films all the time, but I think for the '80s, well, if you mention your films, I'll mention some that I've thought of as well, and
Okay,
we'll bounce back and forth on this. So, what do you have?
cool. Jaws, the
Nah,
Texas. Yeah, nah. What?
nah, 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 nah.
Oh my
I'm not. Jaws never did it for me. I'm sorry. I have to say it. I somehow never resonated with me. So,
God.
yeah.
Okay. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
I have a funny story about that. So my mom grew up around the era that that film came out in the '70s, and she heard that film was absolutely terrifying, and she really, it was it's the scariest thing ever. And at the time, it was a very scary film. And Toby Hooper made a great film. Good film of like indicating horrors before showing it, especially when Leatherface closes that door and drags the girl in. So I was about 18 years old, or 20, 19 or 20 years old. And I think I was about 20 years old. And I got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I was going to watch it. And my mom's like, oh, what's that? And it was like some Saturday. And I go, oh, it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. She goes, you know what? I'm going to watch this thing. I'm going to watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And we're talking like early 2000s here. So
Yeah.
she's finally sat down and we're watching it. And halfway through, she goes, this thing isn't that scary. So she built up like this insanely scary film in her mind. And when she actually saw it, I think it was a bit of a letdown for her in a
Yeah.
weird way. She hates horror films. She hates Carrie. Like Carrie, she thinks is the scariest movie she's ever seen and all that stuff when the hand comes out and everything. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I was never, the only thing I can remember my mom is halfway through going, well, this isn't that scary. I thought this was going to be way worse. Like she was totally disappointed by it.
She might be a
So,
secret hardcore horror film person. She can go in and just be like, what's all the fuss about,
yeah, but for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, more on the list. But I think she built it up in her mind since the '70s. You know what I'm saying? So 30 years
Yeah.
of build up to I'm gonna sit through it. She's like, I'm gonna sit through this, I'm gonna do this, and she's watching, going, wow.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I can remember about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. My mom being disappointed at how how impactful it was for her. I think it's a wonderful film, though. I think it's a wonderful psychological horror film. I mean, you've got Leatherface, but a lot of that's psychology. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of people kind of miss that. So yeah.
Yeah. You touched on Carrie. That's on the list as well.
Carrie is again somewhat of a coming of age film, isn't it? In a weird way as
Yeah.
well. Like I there's a lot of metaphors you can pull out of that. It's yeah, Carrie is an interesting it's a seminal film. And I think yeah, no, it's an interesting one. Yeah, there's a lot you can say about Carrie. What else do you have on that list?
I have Halloween.
John Carpenter, all-time favorite director. One of my all-time favorite directors. I think he's absolutely brilliant. There's another film he directed in the '70s as well, which I don't hear people talk about as much, and which is called Assault on Precinct 13. Have
Oh,
you
I
ever seen
love
that?
that. I
I
love
love
that film.
yeah, inspired by Rio Bravo out of all things. But a raid film, essentially what Night of the Living Dead is as well, right? People trapped in an area. They go, I love Assault on Precinct 13. Uh Halloween, Assault on Precinct 13, those are
Yeah,
that's movie, that's filmmaking right there. That's the
absolutely.
hardcore stuff.
I
Simple
agree.
shots. His shots are simple, but man, do they work. And that guy knows how to build tension as well.
Yeah, I
So
think he's just the master of this genre.
Alien, classic film. Ridley Scott, one of the great last filmmakers we have, in my opinion, of the classic. That man builds worlds. In this case, builds a haunted house film. I prefer the first one over the second one. What about you?
I like the first one, but I love John Hurt, so
Oh, John Hurt's
he can do
fantastic,
no
isn't he?
wrong for me in anything that he's in. He was
Yeah,
just
it's
amazing.
yeah. I think that film is absolutely great. Very few shots in that film compared to like many all the other films in that series, and compared to a lot of Ridley Scott films. Very few shots in that film. A lot of stuff holds tight, builds up. And my favorite scene is when I can't remember the name of the character, but when they're tracking him and he's going down like the shaft and everything else, and like, doot 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 doot, the motion sensor is coming closer and closer and closer. You never see the alien grab him, but that scene builds up tension so well. I love that scene. I also love the scene where the whole thing just turns on, and everybody wakes up. What a movie, man. What a
Yeah.
movie.
The Omen.
See, now this is something that's interesting. The Omen never worked for me as much. I don't know why. It just never connected with me really. But I'm not a big fan of this. I'm going to sound the most worst person in the world. I'm not a big fan with the movies with little kids in them. I don't. It might be terrible. Like, a lot of people love Stranger Things. I love the '80s. Stranger Things didn't work for me too much either. And maybe but that's a personal choice of mine. I'm sure
Yeah.
it's a great film, but The Omen never quite resonated for me. So
Yeah. I
anyhow,
like that. I must admit, I loved that with the photographs, and you could see what was going to happen to them. I just loved
yeah.
that part
That,
about the film. And so
in
many
terms,
creepy things happened on set. Really, people died, and like
yeah,
a
well,
stunt guy died, didn't he?
yeah, well, it's an interesting film. I mean, I think it's well put together. It just somehow The Omen never personally connected for me. But in terms of film technique and talking stuff like this, it's a very sound film. I mean, there's a reason it's a classic. So that's
Yeah.
more than that's more me than the film
Okay.
itself. So,
Personal.
but another film from if I can bring up another film from the '70s, which I think is really cool myself. For some reason, whenever someone brings up The Omen, it brings up another film in my head, which has nothing to do with it, but for some reason I was associated with it. That's a film called Patrick. Have you ever seen Patrick? It's an
No.
Australian film. Very, very cool movie. It's a movie in which it starts out with a young man named Patrick, who is like, I think, early 20s, late teens, and he ends up killing his parents, and then he himself goes into a coma after something goes on. I don't want to explain too much, but the whole film he's in a coma, and Patrick is lying in a hospital bed, and there's a nurse taking care of him and everything else. And soon things happen to the people around the hospital. And turns out Patrick has psychic powers and can kill people with his mind, even though he's bedridden in the hospital. So, and there's some genuinely creepy moments in that film. And it's an exploitation film. I'm a huge fan of Australian exploitation films. And Patrick is absolutely awesome. So if anybody
Yeah.
if you can ever check that one out, it's like this hidden gem of a film, very well put together in terms, again, film technique and stuff like that. Patrick is absolutely fantastic. I love it.
That sounds brilliant. That sounds like my sort of film. I'll
Yeah.
definitely check that out.
There's an Italian ripoff version of it as well, because whenever you do something really well in the '70s and '80s, the Italians made their own version of it. You know what I'm saying? And it's called Patrick Lives Again, and
Oh,
it's the most schlocky, like, insane acid trip of a film. It has nothing to do with the first one, not the same actors, but it's like because the Italians used to get films, and they would kind of make their own versions of them in order to take advantage of the market, because the European market and everything else, and they sell them at film festivals and or film arts and all that stuff. And if we're going to talk about the '70s of them doing that, when it comes to Night of the Living Dead, they made a film called Zombie Due, which I believe is called Zombie Flesh Eaters in England. And
right.
it was
Okay.
a video nasty. In my opinion, that is one of the one of the ultimate grindhouse films. It is fantastic. Zombie Due has some very cool scenes in it. Zombie film on a tropical island. Some of the actors in the film are British. Because they needed to get that market going and everything else. They really were like aiming for like what was interesting for the market. So they got some British actors in there as well, but some actors are speaking Italian and they just dub them over. So imagine on set, some people speak English, but Italian, they're like, oh, we'll dub it later on and everything else. But directed by Lucio Fulci, and very, very cool film. So one of my favorite zombie films ever. Zombie Due, slow moving zombies, pretty creepy, and some very crazy gore for gorehounds. So really
Yeah.
cool stuff.
Fantastic. Last on my list here is The Exorcist.
Yeah, The Exorcist, I think I mean, it's a seminal film. The thing I have with The Exorcist is I like The Exorcist itself. I'm not a big fan of all the films it spawned, which is really weird. Like with Night of the Living Dead, you have like all these zombie films that came out of it, but name me a film that's in the genre that The Exorcist is, in which this whole like um demon possession thing and everything else, except for maybe kind of a Conjuring kind of, but like name me a good demon possession film that's come around in the same genre since then that you really love. I'm curious if you can name one, because a lot of people kind of have trouble with that.
Insidious.
Insidious is cool, but I think it's more of like a ghost film than it is. There's demons in it.
Yeah.
this is cool, but it's like there are things like the Exorcism of Emily Rose and all those films, but I don't think those movies are that great. So I like the film itself. I don't like what it spawned very much. So it's interesting.
With the selection that I've pulled out, these were recommended on the internet.
Right.
Yeah, they're not my selection. Sorry, I should have
Sure.
said before. But it's really interesting to hear your opinions on them.
Yeah.
With your huge horror knowledge, it's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, when it comes down to like the films on the internet just now, like a lot of the films I mentioned just there are actually not necessarily American. Well, the Omen's a bit more of a British thing, but they're also like Italian and Australian
Yeah.
horror films. And I think like if someone's really into horror, those things start coming on your radar. And I think a lot of the good stuff is there from the
Okay.
Italians and from the Australians. They did a lot of good stuff. And the weird thing about the Australian films is the following: a lot of Australians are unaware of them. Like you ask Australians about like, things like that, especially in the 80s. Like you get a lot of films like you get that, and you get things like Dead End Drive-In, which is an awesome movie title, and things like that. And Dead Kids, which is a great film from the 80s as well. I mean, we're jumping in the 80s right now, but like a lot of Australians are kind of unaware. And I have a lot of Australian friends. I have a shed ton of Australian friends. And then and if you ask them about Patrick and stuff like that, they're like, we're not really aware of them. And it seems to be that when the Australians were making films in the 70s, they really were making it for the American markets and stuff like that. They weren't really making them for the Australian market, and they weren't really marketing them to the Australian market. It's really interesting
that is, isn't it? That's quite. I've never heard of Patrick either, but it just sounds such a good film. I need to see it.
It's an awesome film, and it's very remakeable as well. There was a remake at one point that was made, but it wasn't good. But it's a really, really cool film, and I know that Quentin Tarantino was inspired for it when he made Kill Bill.
Okay.
With the bride lying in the bed in Kill Bill Volume 1, and all that, and
Yeah.
all that. So that was inspired by Patrick as well. So he's definitely aware of that movie. So yeah.
You just mentioned about remakes. What's your thought on horror film remakes?
Well, this is really interesting because I was talking to someone recently. Because we'd have to jump kind of to the 80s to really talk about remakes, because that's when we saw the 70s, we saw some of the 80s, we saw some really good ones. And when you talk about, for example, The Thing from Outer Space, which is then done by John Carpenter, and then became The Thing, I mean, that's one of my all-time favorite. I mean, it's John Carpenter, I'm saying,
yeah.
And The Thing actually bombed. Did you know that at the box office?
No.
You know what it went up against?
No.
Another alien film. Can you get called E.T.?
Oh, that small film. Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah, so I think Steven Spielberg's Happy Little Go Lucky Alien wanted just to go home. Did a bit better than John Carpenter's awesomely terrifying, great use of prosthetics. I think, was it Rob Bottin did that? I don't think so. I can't remember. But it was that. Yeah, The Thing did not do well, and I think John Carpenter, and that was a big John Carpenter studio film, and I think John Carpenter's always got the short end of the stick in terms of from his audiences, because his films tend to get discovered more and more later on. And the thing did not do well when it first came out.
That's quite surprising, because as I've been asking people on this series, what's your favorite horror film? It's The Thing.
The Thing.
So many people have said The Thing, and I loved it. I've seen it and loved it.
Remakes can be cool, but there has to be an additional thing you can bring to the story, and it can't. I'm not a fan of the shot-by-shot remake of Psycho. I don't understand the point of that. Why are we doing this? Essentially, Alfred Hitchcock directed that film, in my opinion. If you're going to do shot-for-shot remake, I mean, there's plagiarism, and then there's plagiarism in color, and
I'm kind of on the fence about it. I feel like, Jesus, if they made Enter the Dragon again, if they made Jaws again, if they remake the first 3 Star Wars ones, my era ones again, I'll be pretty pissed off. And I'd just be like, why? Is it just for the money? Because
well, it's because there's a built-in audience. I mean, studios have to put so much money into these things. They're like, well, what worked before? Well, hopefully they'll work again. Talking about Jaws, do you know there's an Italian ripoff version of Jaws that actually spliced? There and no, it gets better. It's directed by a guy named Bruno Mattei, who's one of my favorite rip-off exploitation. Is that what you call it? I don't know. But basically, he basically went so far. He named his film "Cruel Jaws," so he took part of the title and he spliced in footage from Jaws into his film.
That's crazy.
I don't think it's ever come out. I don't think it's ever come out in the States for obvious reasons. Because I think Steven Spielberg is definitely going to sue somebody.
Absolutely.
Universal. But like basically like that, it's called Cruel Jaws. It's an absolutely batshit film, and it's very violent and so good. But they were like, oh, we want Jaws a success. Okay, we'll make Cruel Jaws. Oh, we don't have enough footage. I'll just splice in footage from Jaws. No one will know.
Yeah.
So and it was marketed as the second Jaws film too. They went that far.
But for me, there's been no other shark film, and I think the only other shark film that I've kind of enjoyed is Sharknado, but just for different reasons, completely different reasons.
Yeah, Sharknado is insane. I mean, have you seen The Meg?
I did, yeah.
I thought The Meg was okay. I mean, it was Jason Statham running around like,
yeah,
it was all right. So, but I guess, but I think The Meg is very tongue in cheek and silly.
Yeah, I didn't mind it, but for me, there's been no other that I think Spielberg nailed it.
I guess you can look up Cruel Jaws now, because if Jaws is anything, he's definitely cruel. He bite your hands right off. So like, but Cruel Jaws.
I'll contact you. I'll drop you a message saying I can't believe I said that. I've now seen Cruel Jaws, and like that's it for me.
I would not be surprised in the current Blu-ray environment if someone finds a way to release that on Blu-ray, because it's one of those films that's like just infamous films. Like it's absolutely wild. Definitely watch and be like, just it has to be seen to be believed. Not a very good film, but like, oh my god, this is
okay.
I can't believe they did this. Yeah,
it's like Piranha. It was so funny. Isn't that a great film? Just for laughs.
I think James Cameron worked on one of the Piranha films. That's he
really?
Yeah. So a very young James Cameron worked on one of those.
But that was a tribute to Jaws, apparently.
Well, I'm sure that like, well, again, like Jaws do well. So find me something else that eats something. It was like, well, we can't build a big shark. Well, what do we have? Have you heard of piranhas? I'm sure that's how it goes. Like I've been in pitch meetings where people have gone like, okay, like, give me something like that. Well, it can't be exactly that. Well, all right, write me that. So
yeah,
I mean, that's basically what must have happened. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But a Cruel Jaws. The same Bruno Mattei, really quickly about him. I'm a bit of a fan of his because I'm just like, I can't believe you're doing this. He at one point he made a movie under the name Vincent Dawn, which is awesome because he's a fan of Vincent Price and he loves Dawn. He loved Dawn of the Dead, so he uses a pseudonym called Vincent Dawn. He made a film called Shocking Dark, which is an awesome title. And I showed Joe Farello this film, and his mouth is open the whole time.
We catch up with Arne tomorrow on the 80s and 90s horror films. See you soon.